All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is our UVM Click training session for Extension and CALS. To those of you here in the room in Morrill Hall, welcome. Glad to see you, and hopefully we have some more people coming in online. Please keep in mind that this session is going to be recorded, and we would certainly encourage anyone who would like to not only engage right now, but save that recording and watch it. And if you have any other questions, I'm sure there'll be an opportunity to answer those. I'm Dan Lerner. I'm the Associate Director and Chair for Extension, and I'm going to get off the hot seat and turn things over to Josh Tyak, who's here from SPA, and is going to lead us through this training for UVM Click. So, Josh.
All right. Are you screen sharing already?
I'm stopping mine. You're good to share whenever you want.
So, thank you all for coming. Hold on one second. Let me just get the screen sharing going.
Green button bottom.
All right. Thank you all for coming. I am going to give you guys all an overview of the UVM Click grant systems for submitting proposals. In this training, I'm going to give everyone kind of an overview of the system, show you how to log in, navigate around, and give you an overview of the 5 components of a UVM Click proposal. And then I'm also going to talk about routing, as well as a lot of the sort of process changes that are being put in place with this. Also, assuming we have time, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth about some stuff that is particularly useful for CALS and Extension PIs. We're going to go a little bit more into cost sharing than what we generally do in an introductory training, as well as talk a little bit about the USDA NIFA FNA rate limitations and how we put those into a proposal. And the hope is that after you leave here, you will be able to get and start a proposal in UVM Click and be relatively self-directed, and obviously reach out for help when you need, but that you will have a familiarity with all of the aspects of a UVM Click proposal. So before I dive into this a little bit further, I just wanted to say, there are a lot of changes to how the university is handling sponsored projects that are that we've been doing for some time, but this software adoption really is accelerating that. And one of the big overarching themes is that we found that there's a lot of times when SPA as a central office inserts ourselves in the proposal development process when it's it would be best practice, considering other research universities, to not do that. And there's a lot of times when we are kind of forcing ourselves into various points in the process almost as gatekeepers, where in a kind of like best practices would to have you guys just have the power and ability and tools to just do that all yourself and not be waiting on someone from SPA to upload something for you or to check something for you at all of these stages in the process. And other large research universities very much have a much different relationship between the central office and various proposing departments that UVM has in the past. And we've been sort of trying to move ourselves in a direction of empowering you guys at a departmental level, at a PI level, and sort of having our job not be the gatekeepers, the ones to tell you guys no, or you have to do this and this and this, but to be a resource, subject matter experts, and people who can help you through the process rather than someone who's kind of controlling the process. And a very important piece of that is making sure you guys have the tools you need to do that. We think that UVM Click is the tool that you need to do that. And it really simplifies putting a proposal together compared to what we are currently doing between the SPA budget worksheet, InfoEd, various systems, things like that. But we also really understand that this is a big culture shift, and it's a culture shift, and there's going to be a learning curve of a new system. And so we want to make sure that you guys know to reach out whenever you guys have a question. We are aware that this is a big shift, and there's going to be a long learning curve on this. If you guys have questions, reach out. We are here to help. We're here to make sure you guys have the tools that you need and the knowledge that you guys need. And throughout this process I'm going to describe, there's a bunch of times when I'm going to say something like, if you have a question about this, reach out early. There's a lot of times when we don't need to be looking at things early in the process. And there's a bunch of times when it really does make sense to have us look, and touch base with us early on in a process. And so it's going to be a little bit of a back and forth to figure out kind of what that best balance is, but we're here to help, and we want to make sure that you guys feel supported and that you guys feel like you have the tools you need to put your proposals together. So all that being said, there's a lot of information I'm about to say. So there's various points when I'm going to ask for questions, but let's just save questions if we can until those spots, especially since it's being recorded. So where I'm at right now is the overall UVM Click landing spot on the OVPR website. And this shows the different aspects of UVM Click. We've already launched IRB for human subject stuff, IACUC, IVC, COI, and we've been very successful with these launches, and we've been working for a long time on grants. And March 16th is our launch date, it's our go live date. The system is actually already up and running right now, and we've been poking into it, and everything seems to be going according to plan. And so what that means is, if you have a system-to-system proposal in InfoEd, meaning we're using InfoEd to submit it directly to the sponsor, if it's in the system right now, we can keep using InfoEd. But for really everything else, we're going to be using UVM Click for that. We want to just get into the system and start using it. If you click on the grants page, this brings you to a lot of information about the grants module of UVM Click. In particular, I'm going to point you to the user guides. This has all sorts of user guides. In fact, we've been adding more and more every single day. It looks like they are all almost set and ready for go live. But we're hoping that we have the information you need on this website to really help you out. And in all of these things, if you guys have suggestions about some of these instructional tools we're putting together, some of the side material we're using, if you think that things could be a little bit better or clearer, please reach out and give us that feedback. We want these tools to be useful for you in this entire process. So I'm also going to just highlight information right here about the different kinds of roles in the UVM Click system. There's a lot of differences in terms of the user roles in UVM Click versus InfoEd. So one is that in UVM Click, every single user in the system can technically serve as a PI on a proposal. That doesn't mean that you can actually be a PI per UVM policy, but the system doesn't restrict who can serve as a PI or not. So versus in InfoEd, someone had to reach out to us to add them to PI rights in the system. In UVM Click, we don't have to do that. In UVM Click, every dean and chair and their delegate, as well as every departmental research administrator, has what's called global read access. That means that they can see every single proposal in the system. They can look through it, they can go through it, they can navigate through it, everything that's in development, that's been submitted, that's been awarded. A PI, or just anyone who doesn't have one of those chair, dean, or kind of departmental research administrator roles, does not have that access. You can see your proposals or proposals that you've been added to what we call the proposal team on, meaning that you now have edit access to that proposal. And you will log in right here to UVM Click, and this you would use your UVM Net ID to do that, and NetID password. So I am going to log in right here, and I am, oops, sorry about that. I'm actually going to log in right here. And I'm going to show you how you would create a new funding proposal. I'm logged in as my own name. I can also show you what I'm going to show you as well what it looks like to log in as a PI. It's very similar, but for example, when I log into my inbox, I have like every proposal in the system in here. When you log in, your first page will be the My Inbox page, and this basically will only show things that you are working on. So it'll show a proposal that is waiting for you to do something. It's in draft stage or it needs your sign off on something. So on the top right here, you will see all of these are the various pieces of UVM Collect, the COI system, the IRB system, the IGEC system, and then we are going to go into the grants system. So in this grant system, you would be able to see all of the proposals in the system that you have access to. So if you are a chair or dean, you would be able to see everything in the system here. But if you are a PI, you would just see your proposals or proposal that you've been added to the proposal team on. So everyone has access to this button that says Create Funding Proposal. So everyone can create any proposal in the system. So I'm going to click on that button. And now this brings me to what we call, that's because it's not live. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, even though technically the system's up and running, it's not going to be really possible to follow through on this.
So no one sees the grants on the menu topic.
So UVM Click is organized basically around a lot of these, what we call smart forms. And it's more or less just like a lot of collections of these smart forms. And these all have similar kinds of logic. So for example, there's a lot of questions where if you answer yes versus no, all of a sudden now we're asking you to input additional information or upload something new. I'm going to say no in this case. You'll notice we have the ability to say not just a hard deadline, but a target deadline. For example, if the stage says, hey, we want this from you by a certain date. And then oftentimes we also have these links to other sections. So if you click here, this will bring you to the SPA page about limited competitions. I'm going to say no here. And we also have two different sections that talk about your title. The short form of your title is what will display on all of those, that page that I just showed you, your My Inbox or your list of grants, or any of our internal reports that we generate. So it can be like an internal name for a proposal. So we all know that sometimes the name that goes to the sponsor is very long and you can't always display that on the report. And then you'll see right here, this reverted to me. If it always reverts to whoever is the person who creates the proposal. So I'm going to change this, and now I have basically access to every single user in the system. And we're going to make a proposal for Chris Callahan. So there's also a lot of sections where you have a question mark here. You can click on those and it will pop up information, helpful hints, things like that. And for all these times when there's a link to something or there's a help box, if you would like to see help information in other sections, let us know that, give us that feedback. We can't always do that. Not every section of UVM Click allows a help text thing to be added. But if you think that there's information that would be really helpful for you guys, then let us know that.
So Josh, can you put co-PIs in that box?
No. You'll do co-PIs in a different place. So now I go to add, so this would just be your contact PI. So now we're going to select the sponsor. On all of these boxes that look similar to this, these are like smart search boxes. And you can use a % as a wildcard on either side of a keyword you want to search for. So for example, if I wanted to search for NIFA, I would just say NIFA, and it would pop that up. In this case, we're going to do a subaward. So I'm going to do, let's do the Cornell. Now, if you don't see the sponsor you want when you're searching for it, you would put TBD on there, and then down here you would type in the name of the sponsor, and then we would go into the system and add them in later. Since this is going to be a subaward, I'm now going to add in the prime sponsor, and we'll have this be NIFA. So now we get to the section that has us say what kind of work we're doing that will drive the F&A rates and the purposes for the work that you're doing. We have these question boxes that will pop up information that you can use, and it has different definitions of the kinds of work that's categorized under here. The hope is that you guys can kind of use that to direct yourself and to hopefully be able to choose the right F&A rates and purposes yourself. But this is the exact kind of thing that if you are unclear about, please reach out early on in the process. We don't want to see something en route that's come to us and we're seeing it for the first time with the wrong F&A rate. This is one of those times where we aren't interjected so early in the process, which means that we're trusting you guys to choose the right rates or ask us for questions if you need help. But if we're seeing something with the wrong rate, we're not going to just let you submit that. We will make you go and change that because, with the understanding that you guys had plenty of time to come and talk to us early on and get clarity in that. That being said, for probably the vast majority, well, everyone in this room and most people watching the webinars, it's going to be on-campus. There'll be on-campus research experiment station if you're a non-Extension CALS person, and it would be on-campus either research extension or on-campus service extension if you're an extension person. So we'll just do this as on-campus research extension. And so now I'm going to put in this date, and this date actually drives the budget. Now, all of these things, everything I'm entering in all of these smart forms, you can come back later so long as it's not kind of been locked down for routing and change the answers here. So if you made a mistake or you want to put something else in, you can come back and change that. So now I'm going to press continue. And now we have a funding proposal in the system. Let me just move this down here. So you see on the top right, you have this. It's a FP numbers, FP, some zeros, and then some numbers. This is the funding proposal number that is tied to your proposal in the system. The way we created this by filling out that first page and pressing continue. Once you do those steps, you fill out all the required information on page 1 and press continue. You've now created a proposal in the system. I could exit out and I could come back to this later and I could do stuff to it another time. So it's really important to get that first page done and moved on. So you also remember I pressed the continue button. The system will actually only let you use that continue button if you have filled out all of the required information on any given page. So all of these asterisk things. So we actually suggest for most people to use this jump to feature. If you click this button, you'll pull down basically all the different sections of any particular smart form you're on. So you can jump to the different sections of that smart form. And you can just say save and then move to another smart form section without having to use this continue button because it's often that you won't have all the information on every given page and you want to still make some progress on your proposal. So if this were to be a system-to-system submission, meaning we are using our software to build a proposal that is directly submitted to grants.gov and then on to a federal sponsor, then this page, the personnel page, will drive the senior/key personnel section of your proposal. Meaning you're listing all of the senior people on here who would be included in that senior/key personnel section to upload their bio sketch and everything like that. Just as an aside for System to Systems with UVM Click, we're using it just like we're using InfoEd. So if you would use an InfoEd to submit directly to grants.gov, we'll use UVM Click for that. So that would be every USDA NIFTA proposal, some NRCS, Agricultural Marketing Service, basically almost all USDA entities, plenty of other federal sponsors as well that you guys would be working with. So if this is the case where we're submitting directly to the sponsor, you're going to upload the bio sketch and, for example, for NIFA, the other support here in this section for all key people. One thing to mention is InfoEd allowed us to upload in Word documents, and then InfoEd converted to PDF. For every single thing in UVM Click, if it's being sent to the sponsor, you'll have to upload it in PDF first. It doesn't do that conversion for us. So this is also where you can change the responsible department, and this ends up being the proposal department. It wouldn't be that common, I think, for you guys to do that, but there's sometimes when people are submitting and they may be in one department, but their proposal is being housed in another department. So now we're going to add UVM people to this proposal. So as I said, this section is where it drives both the senior/key personnel section. It also drives the budget. So we're going to add people from UVM first. And so I could pull up anyone who's currently in the PeopleSoft system. I'm just going to add a non-extension person because I've gotten his approval to add him. So for example, this is someone in the College of Medicine. I'm adding him here. I'm giving him a co-investigator role. If I say senior/key personnel in the proposal, it gives me a spot to upload his bio sketch. And again, remember, we would only do that if this is System to System. I don't need to do that for here. I'm going to show you just some other people as well. I don't need that, sorry, add them specifically. So let's add some TBD people on this proposal. So if I type in TBD, it now gives me a bunch of profiles that we have added to the system. And these profiles correspond to different fringe rate. So whether someone's a technician or a postdoc or whatever, if they're a regular employee, they would get the regular employee fringe rate. So I might say TBD postdoctoral associate, and then other personnel is what UVM Click calls non-key people. I think it's nicer than saying someone's non-key, just to say that they're other personnel. So we'll say that, and then we'll add more. So again, I want to add TBD, and let's say I'm adding an outreach person. So I might say other professional. And let's say I'll also add a grad student. And so you'll notice I still have to select the role for these people. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm creating a TBD, like a profile that I could then go and bring into the budget for later. You know what, I'm going to add one more person as key, and I'm going to add a 9-month faculty because there's a lot of 9-month faculty in the room here. All right, so now if this were System to System, here's also where you would add your non-UVM people that need to go into that senior/key personnel section. So if you have an external key consultant, if you have a sub-award PI, all things like that, you would add them here. And to do that, you're going to actually have to add all of their required demographic information, phone numbers, address, all that kind of stuff, and then it gives you a spot here to add their bio sketch. And this is because this is all information, again, that's required to port over into that senior/key personnel in your system-to-system proposal. So this would be a big waste of time to do it if it was a non-system-to-system person. One other thing to mention is that in InfoEd, we had a database of external people that were working on our proposals that we've submitted before. This does not, UVM Click does not have that. So you'll basically have to enter in those people every single time, even if you've submitted 5 proposals with the same collaborator at Cornell or whatever. All right, so now we go down to adding in administrative people at UVM. So you can enter in one single person who's your primary departmental administrative contact. And you can only enter in one person here. So even if you might work with more than one person on a pre-award side to provide support, or perhaps you don't have any pre-award person who provides support, you don't actually have to enter anyone there. But if you do, you would enter in one single person in that box, and that person is basically has copied rights of the PI to do everything in the system that the PI is doing. So they have the same edit rights as the PI, and then they also get copied on all the notifications that the system generates and sends out to the PI. So let's just say that's Rhonda. And then here's where you'll also add people who have edit rights. You'll notice that I was logged in as myself, not as a PI, not pretending to be the PI when I created this. This meant that I automatically have edit rights. Anyone who creates the proposal, even if they switch their name off to not be the PI, always will have edit rights on the proposal. But you can also add people. So you have collaborators at other departments who want to have edit rights. You can add those people. Other administrative people need edit rights. You can add them here. And then you can also take them off too. So if I wasn't supposed to have edit rights, you could take me off. Any questions so far when I've done any of these forms?
Could you clarify system to system, please?
So system to system is where our proposal is building, is when our UVM Click system, or InfoEd before that, is building a proposal within the system to directly send to grants.gov for a lot of our federal sponsors. So all USDA NIFA proposals are system to system. Other USDA entities you guys would be working with, NIH, entities like the DoD. So most federal sponsors will be system to system, basically.
Is NSF grant development?
We're still using research.gov or Fastlane for NSF,
So,
just like with.
but it's also system to system.
You could technically do it system to system, but we're not at UVM. Yeah, most institutions actually still use research.gov and or Fastlane to submit to NSF because it's, I mean, there's a variety of reasons, but it's actually just more stable.
It is,
Yeah, NSF's interface from grants.gov to their system isn't very stable. It's just better to go directly to them.
Ask about the project personnel that's external, if you have the
Yeah.
information.
Can we
Is there an asterisk on the biosketch? Because I was wondering if you don't have it yet, is there other information?
Yeah, I'll show that to you. So,
We're going to need to repeat the questions.
sorry. So the first question was about NSF, saying we are not submitting system to system with NSF. And this question is whether you have to upload a biosketch for a key non-UVM person. And no, you don't have to upload a biosketch. So you can add them in here. You have to say whether they're senior or not, but this biosketch is not asterisked.
We do have a question from online wondering, do we need to add you as a person who can edit, or are you automatically allowed to do that?
So your SPA person is always able to edit. You should never put a SPA person into this role. All right, so,
Questions on the system to system?
yeah.
Does that mean that all the information we're putting in there is automatically populating the USDA R&R forms and that sort of stuff? Or?
Yes, it does. So for the system to system, we're going to go a little more depth. I'm going to show you a system to system proposal in this training, and there's, yes, it does flow over, but there's some eccentricities that you have to keep in mind that I'll go over. Yeah.
So So the administrative contact, that's just pre-award? Or is that any?
So this primary department administrative contact, if you have a separate pre-award or post-award person, you would put the pre-award person in. Because at time of award, we can select a new administrative contact. Some units have different persons for pre-award.
We only have a post-award.
Then you would probably put that person there. That would be the suggestion, yeah.
One more reminder, if we could just repeat the questions from the crowd for the
Yeah,
online
sorry.
audience.
So it's to do with, for the primary departmental administrative contact, if you only have a post-award administrator, I would put your post-award person there. Yeah, that will help for down the line. Yeah.
Will you be talking about, if it's not a system-to-system project, like where we put the?
Yeah. I'm actually, so
personnel?
I normally show a system-to-system submission first. I'm doing a non-system-to-system submission first for a variety of reasons, partially just to emphasize that piece, to show what we're doing for non-system-to-system, and then I'll go back and switch over to a system-to-system.
Okay.
So now I'm going to move on. And so here we get to submission type. So this information is different depending on, that's displayed here is different depending on what kind of submission you've selected. So if you said, if there was no, if this wasn't a subaward, if it was direct to NIFA, for example, the type would be federal there. But for here, because we have this as a subcontract, the type is pass-through subaward. I'll show you later when I'm just showing the system-to-system piece, how you would select for a system-to-system opportunity here, if that was an option, and it's very similar to how InfoEd works. The important piece here is that, so there's various pieces of information that we're collecting depending on what kind of proposal we are putting through. One very important piece is that anytime we're submitting anything outside of a system-to-system submission, there's going to be a box to upload your final proposal there. That's where you'll upload your proposal for routing. So obviously, you probably won't have this in the first time you're creating a proposal. You would come back in and add that in later. Also in this, this is the case where we're calling this a subaward. This allows you to add in, if you want to save that your subaward contact info for who you're sending stuff to at your subaward, you can, but you don't have to. Similarly, if this is like an after the fact type subaward, we already know what our subaward number is going to be. You can enter it here. There's just various things where we sometimes have that information. If we have it, we'll port it over. You enter it here, you would port over later to the award. This is also where you would upload the guidelines, things like that. So now we're going to set the budget dates. Every UVM Click proposal reverts to being 5 years long. Don't ask me why, that just, it is what it is. And so if something is less than 5 years, for example, it's 4 periods, you could say remove period, and it would take off one of those periods. And then if you have periods that are less than a year, you would click upload period. And for example, if this is 9 months, you would say 9 months instead. You also can click this button for advanced editing, and you can say exactly when you want that period to end. And if we have time, we'll show you how this works. But if you had a short period, in fact, I'll just do a short period today. If you do put a short period on, it'll automatically normalize the effort when we're putting the budget together for that short period. And this thing about PHS, NIH modular budgets, that's only for NIH proposals. Most of you guys won't submit those, but for perhaps some people that do, we talk a little bit more about modular budgets in the proposals to training that you can sign up for individually. So now we get to everyone's favorite section, the IBB F&A allocation. So what we're talking about with IBB F&A allocation is we already have F&A that's coming to campus. This is a purely internal thing. Nothing in here ever goes to a sponsor. We're not limiting our F&A or anything. We have F&A from a sponsored project. Under the IBB rules, that F&A is divvied up to the various units on campus according to a set of as an algorithm. The budget worksheet, the SPA budget worksheet, has in tab 2 a section where it shows both what that algorithm would say, where all the F&A automatically would flow, and then a section to show if there's going to be any deviations from that that have to get approved. We are no longer routing the budget worksheet. The SPA budget worksheet is not being routed, which means that we have to have a tool that shows two things. First, what the allocation of the F&A would be under IBB. And second, if there's going to be any deviation to that allocation, what the deviation is. So if your proposal does not have indirects, you don't need to do anything because there's nothing to divvy up. So if you say no, you can just move on. If you say yes, though, we have an IBB F&A allocation tool. You would click this button to download it. It's an Excel tool that basically walks you through showing what the allocation of F&A is under the algorithm in IBB policy, as well as for you to show the deviations from that. And every time I dive too deep in this, we talk a ton about it. And really the important thing is this is not a SPA thing. This is a university-wide thing that we are asked to do. So I'm just going to say, when you're doing these proposals, fill it out. We hope the instructions are very user-friendly and walk you through and very clear, and that the form is also very clear. If you think that the form could be better, the instructions could be better, please let us know that. As I said, this is not our policy, so we want to just do it in the best way, the easiest way possible, that still does the minimum that we have to do under IBB. And so if we can make changes to it that still does that, then great. So
Could you give an example of a deviation from the IBB policy?
So for example, if you are doing a proposal with the SEMS faculty and the SEMS investigator is a co-investigator, under the standard algorithm, they wouldn't get any F&A, but their unit would likely still ask for some of that F&A perhaps because of the facilities and resources that investigator is going to be using that fall under SEMS, that SEMS is responsible for, et cetera, et cetera. Or Rubenstein, for example, often asks for deviations. And so if you were to say yes in that case, then you would, again, upload this tool. But you have to upload this tool every time. But if there's a deviation, in addition to uploading the tool, you have to launch what's called an ancillary review. That is a side approval process that operates like in parallel from everything else we're doing here. And it would go to the dean of your college, or the dean of the proposal college, and the dean of any affected units under the IBB deviation. So if it was a Rubenstein was requesting a deviation, you would launch an ancillary review that would go to CALS, and it would go to the Rubenstein dean, and they would both sign off on the deviation. Yeah.
So for, say, an EPA grant that had the federally negotiated 10%.
So this has nothing to do with how much F&A is on your proposal. It only has to do with once the F&A has hit UVM, where UVM sticks the F&A. It's a purely internal thing. All right, so I'm going to move on. And again, if you're using the system and you have questions about this, feel free, but it's very easy to get bogged down otherwise.
I do have a question from online,
Yeah.
asking if it automatically calculates budget years from project start date. In other words, if the project starts on 9/15.
Yes.
And I think there was one more, but nope.
All right, so now we get to this page that has other kind of side approvals. All three of these kinds of approvals are things that require outside approval. And if you were to say yes, someone would need to upload the relevant approval to it. So for example, if we're going to voluntarily be reducing our F&A, so for example, the sponsor doesn't say, well, F&A is limited to 20%, but for some reason we have decided to eliminate our FNA voluntarily, then you would say yes here, and you would have to have already gotten approval for that and uploaded approval from Brian Prendel or Sonia Stern in that case. And so the important thing is those are all approvals that have to happen prior to you starting the roof. And so then now we have these fairly standard compliance review questions. The one kind of perhaps new piece is under human subjects. If you were to say that you've already kind of have an approved or you've already submitted your IRB, then it would ask you to actually link this proposal to that IRB approval that's already in UVM Click on the IRB side. This is not normally the case. Normally, even if you have an ongoing approved protocol, you don't normally submit your request to tie that approval to the new scope of work until you know it's going to be funded. So for the most part, people would say not yet submitted under here. And then these are all similar kind of compliance questions that you'll answer. And then this is our last page, and it's just asking kind of additional questions. And these are more or less just questions that we've been asked to track, like whether something's cancer related, the SBR, SCTR mechanisms, things like that. And so now I have finished the funding proposal smart forms. So now where I am is what's called a workspace. So each kind of section, each piece of UVM Click is organized around these workspaces. And the workspaces have kind of relevant information up above, and they have action items on the left side. And these action items will be different depending on what the status is and on what people's individual roles are in the system. So any questions on just what I showed, just that, it's called the funding proposal smart form piece? Yeah.
Gosh, I'm not sure if I missed this part. So when you selected at the beginning the category of the proposal, whether you're research,
Yeah.
and all this stuff, and that connects to the UVM negotiated rate, what if your funding opportunity has its own rate cap?
So the question is about, there's a limited rate? Yes, we'll show that in the budget. Yeah. Any other questions?
Online, I'm going to kind of lump these two together because they're both asking cheat sheets, and they acknowledge this might be more of an extension question. But said thanks. I was thinking it would be great to have cheat sheets for common award needs. E.g., last grant I had to do requested UVM Board of Trustees, UVM total budget, UVM fundraising amounts. I had no idea of these things. Would have taken a ton of time to locate, but luckily someone from the foundation offered to help me. It would be great to have an easy access to resources to make grants easier. Less of a question than I guess that's a suggestion. It's someone else asking about cheat sheets for like who your department admin contact is.
Yeah, and we're trying to add more relevant kind of helpful information on our website, for example. Kind of, first of all, going along with this, new tool we're putting out there, but also just to kind of help make it even more and more possible for people to be kind of directing themselves on this. SPA really wants to be like the central subject matter expert and a resource for people. But if you can also get that information from our website, then all the better.
Question.
Yeah.
Is there a provision to auto-populate a second grant from a first grant?
There is, yeah. For example, right, this button, I could say copy, and it would copy over a lot of the information. Not every bit of the information, but like for all intents and purposes, yes, it copies over everything. And in fact, you can do that for something that's already been awarded, and it would just start a whole new funding proposal for you. It's a very useful feature. All right, so now I'm going to show you a budget. And every time you create this new proposal, it automatically creates a budget for you, like a bare bones basic budget that you then can go in and modify. So I would go down to the section that says working budgets, and I'm going to click on, this is the budget that it builds for you first, Cornell budget. So now I'm in a workspace that's just for this budget. So each budget would have their own workspace. And so I click Edit Budget. And then this now has relevant information. You can change the name of the budget. Sometimes people will need to have more than one budget that would roll up together, for example. Because we said this is a USDA NIFA as a prime, it's going to have this question for you. Does it require the use of the 30% TFFA? Does it have that language that everyone hates using now? Because first of all, not every NIFA proposal uses this language. Thankfully, for example, SARE, their funding didn't have that language in it. And a few other funding kind of instruments for NIFA don't use that language. But if your proposal does use that, then you would say yes. And then you would upload this USDA NIFA FNA rate calculator. I am not going to walk everyone through how to use the calculator today, but it's, well, actually, you know what? I will walk people through using the calculator. Why not? But I think I'm going to walk it through after I've already entered in everything, because the right way to do it is actually later on in the process. So I will walk you through it, but just to be able to move forward, I'm going to say, no, it doesn't use that. And so here's where you would be able to limit your FNA rates. If your proposal does not use the standard FNA cost basis and rates, you'll say no. And then you would go down here and you would have the chance to say what the rates would be. And if you're doing this because of a sponsor limitation, you would say yes, and you would upload the evidence of that rate limitation. So it could be, it's usually something in the RFP or something on the sponsor's website, or it could just be an email saying, no, our policy is to only give 20% indirect or something like that. But you need to upload that rate there. Really important, if you have any questions about whether you're doing that FNA limitation right, please reach out early, because that's a really great thing to have a spot already. Just look over and make sure that you're reading the limitations correctly in your funding guidelines, for example. Yeah,
It's kind of tagged onto that. So that was kind of my question. But say I think I did it right and I didn't do it right. Are you guys going to catch that?
Yeah, we'll be reviewing it, but we review it and we'll get to the routing thing. We're inserted in the route on a much later process. We're like officially inserted in the business process of building a sponsored project at a much later point, like systematically, than we currently are in InfoEd. What that means is it's kind of on you to get the help you need if you have a question early on. And we'll go over some kind of suggestions that we have for how to do that once I've shown the bare bone basics of this first. So I'm just going to say yes to move on. Now, if your sponsor had a salary cap, it should port over. We've added a lot of salary caps in, but it's possible that the sponsor you're using doesn't have a salary cap in our system. In that case, you can just add it in here. And now we also give the opportunity to inflate personnel costs. And what we're doing here is we're inflating the base salary that is being entered in for the personnel. So if you want to inflate the base salary, you can. The only time we are not doing that is on an NIH proposal that has a detailed budget. That's going to be it's a relatively rare occurrence for a CALS faculty, but it certainly does happen. So outside of those situations, then it's kind of up to you whether you want to inflate salary. We're trying to get out of the business of sort of saying, oh, well, why do you have 3% inflation instead of 2.5? You know, those kinds of decisions can be up to you guys. It also lets you choose what your inflation rate is going to be as well. So let's just say no for now, and we're going to move on.
That had a checkbox for inflate period 1.
Yeah. So
is that because the salary info isn't in yet for the year that you're proposing?
So what this inflate period 1 would do is it would add a 3% inflation to the base salary it sees in PeopleSoft. You can do that or not do it. It's up to you. like, you know, we found a lot of times that we were kind of in the weeds at the central office asking you to do certain things that didn't really add value to your proposals. It's more like, if you want to inflate period one, you can inflate period one. You know, it will be useful for some people and not as useful for others.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Your salary cap, is that an FTE or you're talking dollar amount?
So salary cap is purely, I will say this, if you don't know what I'm referring to, odds are it will never apply to you. Basically, certain federal sponsors will limit the rate of pay to a certain dollar amount.
Like a consultant.
No, well,
See, that's
yes,
what
for NIFA, yes, but you would never enter in a consultant this way anyways. But it's a similar idea. Really, it's NIH is the biggest one that has something that is applicable here.
Some of them limit how many months you can ask for.
That's so what we're talking about when we're talking about salary cap is the federal government has said you cannot ask for a rate of pay above a certain amount for anyone on this proposal. Everything else is like a sponsored guideline by guideline thing. That's just, those are other, you know, are you meeting the terms of the proposal basically? So I'm going to say in here, so now we're on the personnel cost definition. This page is what we're going to pull in all of the various people we want to see on our budget. So if I click this import proposal personnel button, this is going to bring in all of those people we added to that earlier in the funding proposal page. If you're realizing you're missing someone, you can click this button and it brings you right back to that page again. This is where it would make sense to add new people, right here. So now I'm going to pause my sharing. Freeze. Yep, it's on. All right.
Don't forget to stop your share.
Yeah, I did. So it pulls in everyone's salary info, and we just don't like to flash that to everyone on the screen. So I'm just putting in a round number for everyone who's in the system already. All right, so when you add someone who's already has a PeopleSoft profile, the system will pull in their base salary, their institutional base salary. And for the vast majority of people on campus, it's correct. Even if someone has a 0.8 FTE, it'll normalize that base salary correctly to a 1.0 FTE, for example. The few people we see are, well, first of all, if someone's salary is just wrong in PeopleSoft, obviously it won't come in correctly. Also, the bigger issue that would probably be pretty rare for any of you guys to deal with, but is there's some people at the hospital. For example, if you are in a clinical position that's less than 1.0 FTE, for example, that won't work, that will pull it incorrectly. Also, if someone has like 3 jobs, including one at the hospital, so someone is a clinical doctor at the hospital and a college of medicine professor and a college of medicine chair, for example, there's some issues with that. I haven't seen any issues with any CALS or extension faculty, so long as they have their correct FTE and salary in the system. At the end of a fiscal year, every once in a while when there's people that do have an FTE that fluctuates a little bit, sometimes that FTE that's in PeopleSoft is not up to date compared to what their salary is in PeopleSoft. So this should be right and accurate for everyone. As I said, on a handful of times, every once in a while, you might see an issue. But it is something that you can trust, and we give you guys a blessing to trust the salaries that are in here. Yeah, what's that?
If I'm going back and changing personnel and adding personnel, I have to redo that import each time?
No, I'll show you how to add a new person in a second.
Thank you.
So these 2 people have a base salary in the system, but the TBD people obviously don't. They're not in PeopleSoft. So we're going to click update and we're going to add a base salary for them. And even if we suggest most grad students, you should just add a grad student as a TBD grad student. It makes sense because the grad students aren't always in PeopleSoft in a coherent, accurate way. So it would make sense to just add a grad student as a TBD person. So let's say I want to add more than one grad student. I would click this button and say add. And now I would pull down and say, and then that gives me another grad student to add. And so you would do the same thing if you wanted to add a new kind of person. You would go back to that funding proposal page. You would add in the new role you want, or the new, let's say you need to add a technician. You would go back to the funding proposal, add a TBD technician, and then they would now be available on this drag down thing. All right, so now I'm going to show, my guess is people are wondering how to do the 9-month, 3-month thing. So I would say probably the majority of 9-month faculty go on sponsored projects in their 3-month summer period. How you do that is you would basically have to manually change your appointment and base from 9-month to 3-month. So I would click here, I would do that, and then now I would update that to that 3-month version of that 9-month salary. And then now that's a 3-month position. If someone is going to be in 9-month and 3-month, it actually looks a lot like it looks currently in your budget worksheet. So pull this person down. Let's just normalize that to the salary. And then I would say, so now you would be able to put this person on your budget for a 9-month or a 3-month appointment for both of them. But I would say the majority, I would say the majority of times when 9-month faculty go on sponsored projects, it is in your 3-month period. So now I'm going to say continue. And now this brings me to the page where I'm actually able to put people's effort on the proposal. If I say show effort, each line has, each kind of entry into the budget for the personnel has 2 spots to enter a % effort. There's the thing that says effort, and there's the thing that says salary request. The difference between those is your cost share, if you're going to be cost sharing effort. So for example, if Chris is putting 10% on this proposal, but we're only asking for 5%, that's him showing a 5% cost share in effort on this proposal. And so we're going to leave that and show you how to do a cost share budget as well. But let's say, for example, this PI is also doing 10%. And if you click this triangle button right here, it moves whatever value is over all the way to the right. And something that's really useful too is you can change these efforts in the different years. You don't have to futz around with different formulas. You just change what the value is going to be in each year.
You have not applied inflation, right?
Yes, I have not applied inflation, but if I had, then these would be moving up and up and up. You also can change these base salaries manually yourself in the out years. So for example, let's say we happen to know that Chris was going to get a huge promotion next year. You could just, yeah, there you go. You could just do that, and we're not going to be like, if you do that, we're trusting you that you're doing it for the reason that I'm saying, like that you have a reason for putting someone in at a higher base salary than their current salary. And so when this goes forward en route and everyone's signing off on it, you're signing off on the fact that, yeah, it makes sense to put Chris in at this higher base salary.
What if someone is just cost share?
You could do that too. I would say 0 here. And now this is a 10% cost share. Or you could do, it would be a 5% cost share if it was just 5%. So basically you're creating that effort cost share by this difference between these two values, whatever it may be. Just keep it how it was. And then finish this. One thing you may also be noticing is that our fringe rates are exactly the same in each year of the proposal. We are no longer using those projected fringe increases. And this is for a variety of reasons. The main is because, well, one reason is because it makes our proposals so much simpler. Like, this is the exact kind of thing that used to require SPA to be looking at it. Oh God, did you do the right fringe in the right years? It's an unnecessary complication because we don't actually know what our fringe rates are going to be in the out years. So we're adding all those complications for something that we actually don't know what it's going to be. Also, there are certain sponsors that lop off those increases. They don't even talk to us about it. They just say, sorry, year 2 is going to be $275 less, year 3 is going to be that, you know, and they just do it. And, you know, and we have no ability to even counter that. And so really, it both makes our proposals better and way easier for you guys to just put them together and for everyone to be reviewing them. And it's really the right thing to do. I would say almost every single time I get a sub-award budget from like a major research university, they have flat fringe rates across the years. So if I'm getting a sub-award budget from University of Washington, it's just one fringe rate in all years for faculty, for example.
I have a question. So we should expect though that if the fringe rate at UVM does go up, that what will be honored? The fringe rate that the university signed off on,
So-
or the new fringe rate?
So one of the reasons why this is an unnecessary complication, having the projected out year fringe rates, is because what currently happens is what will happen. Your current negotiated fringe rate is what will be charged to the sponsor, regardless of what you put in the proposal. That's what we have to do. So if we thought it was going to be 47% in year 2 and it's 46.7%, it's that 46.7% that's being charged on to the sponsor. It's based on your negotiated fringe rate at the time that the expenses are hitting the award. And so that's always the case. And so basically what you'll do is what we currently do when there's a mismatch between that, or when someone is making more money than we anticipated them making in the out years. You rebudget, you adjust efforts, you do all sorts of things that we do to balance our budgets out. And that's just a part of the standard administering a proposal. And most of the sponsors, basically every one of the sponsors we deal with, gives us a lot of latitude to rebudget, you know, and that's one of the reasons they give us a lot of latitude to rebudget, is because they know things like that will happen. And rather than having this incredibly complicated and precise calculation for what your year 4 fringe is going to be, they'd rather you just get the proposal to them, they'll fund it, and that, you know, when you have that negotiated fringe rate in year 4, that's what will be charged to them. So basically, the times when people might get worried is, let's say you have a relatively smaller, or let's say you have an award that's almost all salary, and it's a multi-year award with all salary, and you have a lot of people that are working 12 months effort. In those cases, I would just suggest finding ways, if you're worried about the amount of money in your award covering your total personnel costs, then that would be a good reason to adjust the amount of effort or just the salaries or just the whatever in order to get on your projected budget what you think is necessary in order for you to complete the scope of work in the time frame you're doing.
So to clarify, I'm a little slow. Does that mean that we just put the existing fringe and start with
Exactly.
that, and that's the placeholder?
Yep.
Okay.
Your existing fringe, yeah. And so the system automatically does it for you. So long as you added people the correct way, those roles will come in, and it should all be automatic that way. Let me.
It's a window though, is that something that can be edited by us?
Yes, it can be, but we wouldn't want you to do that. It can be edited.
So just have the budget somewhere else.
That's exactly what I'm suggesting. Yeah.
I have another question.
So, well, real quick, let me just show you guys something. So if I say show totals here, you'll also see, if you remember back in that funding proposal, I made period 4 6 months long. You'll see here, this is automatically adjusting that salary. What it's doing is basically saying there's, how much effort did I say, 5%? It's putting 5% effort each month for 6 months, basically. That's how it's calculating it, and that's how we would put it into PeopleSoft if awarded. So, so that's how it normalizes based on the short time period, is by putting in that marginal effort over the short period as you're doing it. So, for example, you might need to say, oh, well, I want to actually up my effort in that last period to make sure that I'm putting enough effort in, because the system saw that it's a short period and is kind of normalizing my effort request there, if that makes sense. All right, any more questions on personnel costs before I move on? Yeah.
I just have a general question as far as when we'll look at what we entered in this.
I'll answer that later.
Well, can I just give you the question?
Sure.
Which is, do you look at it relative to when the grant is due, or when, if the faculty member enters this early, would you see it much earlier than when the grant is due and get fee?
The short answer is it depends on what you ask us to do, probably. So, so we'll talk about that when we talk about kind of some of the process changes and how the approval process works. But I'll say this: yes, if you want us to look at your budget, if you have a final budget early that you think is all done and you want us to weigh in, yes, we will weigh in on it. Yeah.
So you mentioned period for 6 months, but your date still reported as 12 months. Does that get changed, or we just have to assume?
Where is the dates reported as 12 months?
Oh, I
That's,
guess you're right, it is
yeah,
6
that's-
months, okay, never mind.
Okay.
I thought it was just automatic 12 months.
I'm going to move on, and now we're going to add other direct costs to this budget. So this is where you add all costs outside of personnel costs or subaward costs. So I'm going to say add, and this pull-down list gives you a whole bunch of kinds of direct costs to put on your proposal. There are way more costs in here than there are entries, like standard categories on a standard federal budget form. This instead we decided that it should mirror the post-award F-level piece of how you would spend your budgets. So, like, the idea is that this should hopefully help you put your budgets together if you know how you're going to spend it on the post-award side. This should map that a little bit better, and then it would kind of guide what the budget should look like based on how you know that you're going to spend it. So let's just add a few things on here. We're adding some tuition. It gives us the option to add inflation or not. I'm going to do it both ways, and you'll kind of see what that does. Also, for costs that are normally outside of the indirect base, it'll automatically revert to that and do that correctly. So tuition is, we don't want to put indirects on it. If it's our standard F&A rates, we would say no. I'm just going to put these two costs on here. So you'll notice I said yes to inflation for tuition and fees. That now doesn't allow me to edit the out year values. So if you do want to edit those out your values, you would click on that here and you would say no. So now that allows me to edit. And so of course you can, change these to what they should be in the various years. Whatever you want. And so now we have put our budget together. This is a complete budget, assuming, I should say, absent that NIFA F&A limitation craziness. So you'll notice it says this budget has a salary overage of $20,000. Anytime you're creating that cost share from the effort, it's going to prompt you for that there. And it's going to say, create a cost share budget. So now we are going to do a cost share budget. And then I'm going to come back after we've done the entire budget piece to show you the NIFA limitation. So I'm going to say create cost share. So there's different kinds of cost share on a proposal. If you happen to be doing an NIH proposal that has salary cap cost share, that's not really cost share because it's not cost share in the proposal. It's like an internal cost share we're doing. Similarly, if the only cost share is just that minimum PI time commitment, that 1% effort commitment, but you're not putting that on the proposal, meaning you're not showing that cost share to the sponsor, you would say none. You would say none, and you would say internal commitment, minimum PI time commitment. Yeah.
Josh, I apologize if you just said this, but is there a way to indicate here unrecovered F&A used as cost share?
Oh, we're getting to that.
Oh.
Don't worry. So in this case, though, yes, we're going to show we'll show this as mandatory cost share. So mandatory cost share means it's a cost share that's required in order to meet the sponsor's requirements. And for all this cost share stuff we're talking about, if you have questions about whether you're meeting the requirements, those are other great things to loop SPA into early on in the process. So if you say any of these mandatory, voluntary committed would mean that like the sponsor doesn't require the cost share, but we have decided that for whatever reason, we want to show the sponsor cost share. So sometimes a sponsor will say, cost share isn't required, but it's preferred, which is, it's sort of then kind of required, but it's not technically required. So in order to be competitive, for example, we'll say, okay, yes, we'll put some cost share on there. So let's say this is mandatory. Now it's going to give us a few different things that it wants to add. Because again, with that budget worksheet, it allowed us to show cost share coming from different places. UVM Click just doesn't do that. And so we need to be able to show where cost share is coming from for everyone to sign off. So if all the cost share on the proposal is coming from the submitting department only, you would say yes and move on, not have to do anything. If another department is providing some cost sharing, let's say, it's an extension proposal, but there's cost sharing coming from plant soil science, you would say no here, and then we will need you to add a form. You would say in this case, plant soil science, and then you upload the cost share approval request form. And you would do that for each department that's providing cost share, and that's a UVM department providing cost share. Similarly, if you're using unrecovered F&A to meet the mandatory cost share, we'd say yes, and then we have an unrecovered F&A calculator tool. Again, this feels like a lot. Sometimes when we say, oh, you have this tool and this tool and this tool, basically that budget worksheet that we used was this all-in-one tool that encompassed all sorts of things. And so, in kind of like a lot of our processes were built around the most complicated kind of proposal that you could submit. And so it had, oh, you had to do this for all of these proposals. Yet the budget worksheet included all these tools for all these other proposals, even when it was unnecessary. Instead, since we're not using the budget worksheet, we are basically replicating some of that functionality that was UVM specific stuff that we needed with a la carte tools, saying, okay, well, now you only need to deal with this cost share, where the cost share is coming from, if your cost share is coming from other departments from your own. So there's a tool for that. Same with unrecovered F&A. If you're using unrecovered F&A, there's a tool for that. And so it sounds like a lot when you're giving the training and you're saying, oh, this tool, this tool, this tool. But in practice, it's really, we're saying, we have these tools that you will only use if it's applicable for this kind of proposal. And we're also, they're fairly, I think, clear tools. And again, these are the kinds of things where, if you don't like the unrecovered F&A calculator that I put together myself, tell me, and I will try to make it better. There's only so many things that I can possibly keep in mind. And if other people are using it and you think, no, this doesn't make sense to me, then let me know, because we're all in the weeds a little bit in this right now anyways. And so it's good to have, if you think, oh no, I really wish that you would rephrase how you ask this question, for example, we can try and do that with these tools. I'm not going to show you these tools specifically because we could spend like an hour just going over them. Not because they're hard, but just because there's so many different iterations of how you would do it. But let's just say what the tool does is it tells you how much F&A you could use to meet your cost sharing requirements if your sponsor allows you to use F&A to meet cost sharing, because not all sponsors allow you to use F&A to meet cost sharing. So if your sponsor allows you to use F&A to meet cost sharing, it will calculate that number that's like the maximum you can use to meet your cost sharing requirements. But then it will also then prompt you to say, well, at UVM, we don't want you to overmatch through F&A. If you need to hit $50,000 in match, but using unrecovered F&A, you could match $75,000. We don't want you to just put $75,000 match on your proposal, because we generate match for F&A based on direct cost spending, which means that if you underspend your grant by $1, you're now under meeting F&A, or you're under meeting your match through that F&A. So we want you to only use the exact amount that you need to. And then it basically gives you the record of how much F&A, we'll then have a record of how much F&A we're using to meet our match. So I will say this, we actually go in more depth on this in the proposals to training that you could sign up for individually. Also, if you want some one-on-one training on how to use it, feel free to reach out, we can do that.
Quick question, Josh, and I know you mentioned the website before, but there's a question about, apart from this recording, will there be written guidelines on how to navigate?
Yeah, the written guideline, there's a bunch already on there, and we're adding more FAQs and things like that.
And just to clarify, the F&A is auto-generated previously according to your selections, and this is the place where you make those changes.
Sort of.
Okay.
So one of the reasons why is that the UVM Click budget tool, it will just generate how much F&A you say the sponsor is allowing you. It won't generate that difference for us automatically, the difference between the sponsor approved rate and the UVM rate. So that's what we need a tool to do to show what that difference is if we're going to use that to meet cost sharing. All right, so, oops. Oh yeah, sorry. Also, if there's third-party match, so this is match that will be outside of our system. So like volunteer time, donated time for equipment maintenance or something. You would say, in this case, yes. If you have a commitment letter, it would prompt you to upload that commitment letter. If you don't have the commitment letter yet, it would prompt you to describe the amount and what it is. Basically just so that it's clear for everyone when they're approving this, what that is and that it's okay, because third-party commitments are still, like, we're still committing them in our proposal. All right, so now this section works just like it's basically a mirror image in a lot of ways of that other budget tool I showed you. There's this first page that kind of shows the standard F&A pieces. I'll go next. And now, one difference is that this doesn't now let us change what the cost shared effort is. This just shows us. So this shows us the cost share that we've basically inputted on that other part of the budget, the main sponsor budget tool. That's where you would put in everyone's efforts. This is just a reflection of what you've already done. Like, I can't edit this page at all. But for example, this shows me that I have a 5% cost share for Chris in years 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and then what that amount is. This would also allow you to put in other direct costs as cost share. For example, if if we're cost sharing like a membership subscription cost, sometimes we do that. It would allow us to do that. And that it operates just the same way as that other budget piece does. So now we have a completed cost sharing budget. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to show just a very quick sub-award budget. Now I'm back in this main sponsored budget. And if you ever are wondering where you are, if you go to the top left, there's this thing that it's called our breadcrumbs. And this kind of shows you this could link me right back to that main proposal, but now it's Cornell University, which is the name of the sponsored budget. You could rename that. You could just, to be clear, sponsored budget, for example. But now I'm going to say create sub-award. And this information that's on here, for the most part, it's for our internal use. So the title of the sub-award is just what you want to call the sub-award. You could just say UMass sub-award. I've obviously used that title before. The one thing that does go someplace is, I'm not going to embarrass myself by misspelling Massachusetts. If this was a system-to-system proposal, the organization you select here does create a new entry on that other performance place site page of your system-to-system, your grants.gov proposal. Everything else is just like for internal use only. Even this name is for internal use only, technically. Now, there are two different ways of entering a sub-award. If this was a system-to-system submission, what you should do is download from the SPA website a very specific, clean, correct, works right sub-award R&R budget form, which is the required budget form for most of our federal sponsors. You would send that to the sub-award. They would complete it, and then you would say SF424 sub-award import. It would import that budget info for you. And in the proposal that the system builds, it would extract all that budget information for you so that you wouldn't have to go and double enter the sub-award budget information that our sub-award is sending you, which is really great. Now we're not going to show that here. It works very well, and I have yet to break it if I've used the downloaded form on our website.
Would UMass have to have the same system in place?
No. They would just, you would send them that budget, they would fill it out. It's the same budget form. I'm sure plenty of you guys have already filled out before, but it's the one that Collect tells us specifically it works, basically. Like, they know it works. So now I'm going to say, I'm just going to enter in now so again, this is the other way of entering a sub-award. And here I'm just adding in the directs and the indirect costs in each period for the sub. And this is just how it works with the budget worksheet. You would say $100,000 a year, perhaps, and then say whatever. Well, maybe the NIF limit, 42.857. And then I say finish, and then that's it. And so now we have, I mean, again, we have this other sub-award workspace, and then I can go back to my main budget. If I had more than one sub-award, it would show kind of the list of all the different sub-awards right here. And then you can now see these sub-award costs are now in my budget here. One thing to mention is that like there's various ways of looking at the budget, like literally viewing the budget. You can click this export budget, and it exports an Excel file that some people would find useful and some people wouldn't, just depending on how you would use the data. You can click this printer version, and this like shows you a quick view of all of that information that you just entered. So now, all right, now let's tackle that NIFA thing. So the link to the form is not on there, so I need to just go and pull it up real quick. So I'm just going to show you quickly what it looks like. But if anyone's not familiar with what we're talking about here, USDA NIFA and their infinite wisdom added in language in the Farm Bill for a lot of their awards that said that basically, you know, rather than the FNA being limited to 30% of total federal funds, they say that all FNA included on the entire proposal is limited to 3% of total federal funds, which means that, like, if we have a subaward on our proposal that are asking for, let's say it's $1 million proposal, total cost is, or let's say it's a $1 million proposal. All FNA is limited to $300,000, which means that if we had a subaward who had $100,000 in FNA, we could only put $200,000 of FNA on the proposal, regardless of the FNA rate. This is made even more complicated by the fact that we're also still limited by our FNA rate agreement. So for example, for most extension proposals, they would still use 25.7% MTDC. It would take an extension proposal with a whole lot of things happening in order for them to be limited by 30% of total federal funds. Whereas if it's a CALS proposal at the 53% experimentation rate, all of your proposals would probably be limited to that 3% of total federal funds, but you still have to, we have to have a way of both calculating what that is as well as comparing it to the negotiated rate. So basically, what our calculator does is it does that. So just as an example, let's say it is 53%. Now, I would then enter the, and these instructions are actually old. The one I pulled up has, the actual ones we're posting have much better instructions. Let's just say this. These are my placeholder instructions. So I would go to that budget form, the UVM Click budget tool, find the total direct costs. Let's say that they were, whatever, $500,000. Then I would go to this tab 2, and I would fill out information from all of our subawards. So one of the things that's really important with this is that if you are doing a NIFA proposal that's limited, that has this limitation, you have to get your subaward stuff finalized ASAP. Like, you will not be able to successfully submit your proposal to NIFA unless you have your subawards finalized early in the process. Like, I'm not trying to, that's literally just how it works. Like, it will fail if you don't have those finalized early. So you would get your subaward, total subaward amount. Let's say we have one subaward that's going to be, $30,000. The tool tells you what the max FNA you could collect, they could charge based on it is. And let's say they're doing that, right? But then let's say you might have a $100,000 subaward to an institution that's like an extension service that maybe has a reduced FNA rate. So maybe they're only collecting $15,000. So now, and then we would also enter in if we have, anything that's excluded from our standard MTDC base. So let's say you have equipment at 50,000.
Josh, what does MTDC mean?
It means modified total direct cost. That's the base that our standard UVM, the base means that the amount that our indirect costs calculate from. So normally tuition and equipment, things like that you don't charge indirects on them under a standard federal rate agreement. So that would be an MTDC rate agreement, or that would be based on MTDC rate. You would exclude all those things. So basically I've entered in everything, and what this is telling me, and the instructions on the actual tool are a little bit clearer than this. I pulled up an old one. This tells me, would say either TDC or MTDC. If this is TDC, then you would go down here and you would enter in your TDC cost back in our UVM tool, and I'll show you how to use that. If this is MTDC, that means that our UVM negotiated rate is lower than the NIFA rate, meaning we'll go with our UVM rate. So for example, if this was an extension proposal, it would say MTDC. MTDC would be lower in this case than the NIFA rate exclusion, or the NIFA rate limitation. I'm gonna just show you how to do this. So let's say this was the case, and basically you're filling out everything in that budget tool, and then now that you've done this calculation, you'll go back to the budget tool, and I'll show you how to do that. It's 36%. So I would do this, for example. I would say edit budget, and I would now say no. Well, in this case, I would also say that, yes, it does use this limitation. We would upload that tool that you just completed so that we can also review it, because we want to double check everything. This is a complicated, weird process, right? So you would upload that tool, and then you would say no here, and you would switch this from MTDC to TDC. And in that case, you would say 36%. Now it switches the base for you. And we do this just as an FYI, we switch this base when we're limited to the NIFA limitation, because it makes your guys' budgeting way easier. It makes everyone's budgeting way easier, basically. Because, for example, let's say we were to use an MTDC base, but it's still limited to that NIFA limitation. If you were to change the tuition amount, it would change then the MTDC rate you were allowed to use, which meant that, let's say you go back and you tweak your budget a little bit, you would have to rerun that whole process again to get what your actual FNA rate is. If you use a TDC base, it's way more stable and it stays consistent. And same thing at post-award time. Like if your tuition dollars are different than you think they are, the equipment dollars are different, then we would have to re-budget your proposal constantly and keep on changing your FNA rate, which is it's not very useful. So instead, when we are limited to this NIFA limitation, and the NIFA limitation is lower than our negotiated rate, we switch everything to a TDC rate, which means that we are now charging directs on equipment, tuition, subaward, et cetera, all that kind of stuff. And that is maybe just a little too in the weeds, but if you have questions about it, ask me later, or we can give you some one-on-one training on it too. I'm just going to say yes to switch this all back over to how it's standard. Right, so now I have a budget. This budget, I've shown you all aspects of the UVM Collect budget. Are there any more outstanding questions about just how to put your budget together? Yeah.
So
particularly in subcontracts, but also in some proposals, there may be a limit. There's often a number that I'm trying to get my budget to be at. Been told 125,000. Please get at that number.
Yeah.
So I see lots of benefits of moving away from the spreadsheet, but the nice thing about the spreadsheet was I could quickly play with things that could be moved around. For that particular use, how do you recommend we figure out what our approximate number is? It may not be the approved number, but.
So this UVM Click budget tool is very great and easy to use for putting together a proposal from scratch and kind of like Tetrising it out and just getting your budget out there. But yes, there are a number of situations that I could foresee people wanting to use an offline spreadsheet to do their calculations with. That's a perfect reason for doing it, right? Like needing to use GoalSeek to get to a specific value. I will say, once you use the tool, I had a significant concern about that. Once I did about 1,000 of these, I did realize that that there are a lot of ways in which you can get there without that tool, depending on how precise you want to be. But yes, there are still going to be, I think, plenty of circumstances in which people will find it helpful to have some kind of an Excel spreadsheet. The big change is we're not routing that. We don't need to see that. That doesn't become a part of the official record. We have some ideas like at SPA about ways in which people can do that I'd be like happy to kind of share. I think at some point in time we might, in a perfect world, we'll probably kind of strip out some of the complicated pieces from the budget worksheet and retool it to just match UVM Click and allow people to, like, we can send that to people if they want to have a tool, but it wouldn't be something that we're using. It wouldn't be something that we're meant to review. It would more just be if you guys would find it useful. Yeah. Any other questions? That's a good question. That's something that people will have to figure out for themselves, I think.
Suggestion from online, feature suggestion about having a tooltip. So when you hover over something, maybe a short description pops up.
I know that would be a great idea, but the system doesn't do that, unfortunately. All right, any other questions about just this budget tool? All right. I'm going to now move on. Wow, we are running out of time fast. There's a lot to cover right now. I'm going to quickly jump to showing you guys a system-to-system submission. And to do that, I'm going to log in as a PI real quick that just already has something in the system to show everyone.
Quick follow-up on that tooltip thing.
Yeah.
Someone noticed that it did look like some questions had a question mark icon on them.
Yeah, so you can click there and it pops up something. Yeah.
All right, so there.
So, under this submission information page, way back in that funding proposal, if this is a federal sponsor, you would have this option to do it either to say, is this submitted system to system or no? If you say yes, then it would give you the option to basically enter in your opportunity number, just like an InfoEd, and it will do that, and it will pull it up. If you go to the next page, if you've done that, this will also show you all the possible form sets that grants.gov would expect with this, and it will just confirm that UVM Click supports it. On the off chance that it says no, then you would reach out to your SPA RA and we would troubleshoot it and figure out how to do it. So if you've done that, you will have this option that says create update SF424. The SF424 is the system-to-system piece of UVM Click. So InfoEd kind of combined everything together in one section. You're putting together your proposal and it like builds you're putting together the proposal, you're answering the questions, and it builds a proposal for you. UVM Click has sort of a side section that's just your system to system piece. And there's a lot of really good benefits for that. So if I click this link right here, SF44 link, the SF44 is again the system to system piece. So now it's opening up a whole new workspace that's just this workspace for this proposal. So if I go in here and say edit grant application, this will basically show me all the sections of this federal grant. You know, you click to this jump to again, and you can look to all the sections that it has you fill out. And for those who remember way back when we had those PDF packets, it looks honestly a lot like that. It's kind of, the information is kind of relayed that way. And you'll fill everything out in this form. So it will bring in all the information that we just inputted. Everything from that budget piece, everything from that funding proposal piece gets moved over here, okay? However, there's still plenty of times that you're gonna have to enter information. For example, there's a lot of times when people don't have their phone number in their PeopleSoft profile. So you can probably try to add your profile, your phone number in your PeopleSoft profile, but if it's not in there, you'll have to add it. You know, any of these sections that has an asterisk is a section that needs to be completed. And again, just like in those other smart forms, we can't press continue until that's done. But especially with this SF44, you'll want to use the jump to kind of jump around and see different sections. And also it has a great hide show errors feature that basically shows you all the times you've missed one of those boxes. It's very easy to mix them. The asterisk is really small. And so it'll actually link you to where you're missing that box. And I'll just show you guys the budget, for example. It pulls in everything correctly. It's actually really quite good. The budget pulls everything in to the budget form and kind of converts it over to how you would want to see it. And you'll upload everything just how you would a normal proposal. So for example, this has the same information, and you would upload, you know, project summary. These upload boxes are all pretty similar. One thing that Click does, so for example, let me, I'll just say, call it specific, whatever. So if you don't change the name of the file, if you don't enter anything in this title box, then it'll name the file and what gets sent to the sponsor exactly what the file is named. But obviously a lot of sponsors have very specific titles they want the file to be uploaded as, so you could retitle things here and upload that. And then again, as a reminder, everything has to be in PDF in this section when we're talking about the system to system piece. I'm just going to exit, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about, so there's also these validations that it runs. It runs multiple sets of validations. It's a pretty good system that way. And we talk a lot more about system to systems, again, in proposals too, but I wanted to just give everyone a quick overview of it here. But one thing that's really important to note, so as I said, everything ports over from those other pieces that we've done, those like internal UVM pieces. It's like before we were doing UVM stuff, now we're doing the sponsor piece. They're like they're almost two separate things, really. There's one really awesome benefit to that, which is that in InfoEd, like if there was something wrong with the proposal it was building, you had to go and like it was a very closed system. You had to go and try and figure out how to trick InfoEd into doing something to make it work right. Here, if there's something wrong, you just change it, and it changes the actual proposal going to the sponsor. You don't have to go and try and figure out, well, how do I get that box to display this information I need it to display? Which is really awesome. But one of the kind of downsides along with that is that when you bring information over from the other side, from the funding proposal piece, so let's say we've already created this and we realize, oh no, I forgot to add this key person. You go back to that funding proposal, you add that key person, you say, create update SF424. If you've changed any of those information boxes in the SF424 that have information that it expects to come from the funding proposal, like the name of the PI, the telephone number, whatever, if you've changed any of those, when you click Create Update SF424, it wipes out all those changes and re-imports everything that you are doing. So, for example, like a really common, a good way to illustrate this is, let's say someone has a different professional name as their legal name. Like their legal name is, their professional name is their maiden name, but their legal name is different in PeopleSoft. It will always show in UVM Click as their legal name. There's literally no way. The only way to change that is to have HR change your PeopleSoft profile. But you want to submit a proposal under your professional name, you go into that SF424, you change the PI last name to your professional last name, your maiden last name. If you ever have to go back on this and change that, it'll wipe out that change again. So it's just, you'll just have to kind of get used to when to make those changes. And then there is this, so when you click that update, it allows you to only update certain sections. So if you know only one section is getting updated, you can, like, there are things you can do to kind of reduce the downside to that. All right, so I've now showed you every piece of the UVM Click system. I don't think we're going to get to too much some of these other proposal scenarios. I want to talk about routing and kind of other kind of business processes that are changing with that. So there are two huge, sorry, what was your question? Is it about what I've shown? Yeah.
You talked about kind of renaming attachments when you upload them.
Yeah.
I saw earlier that there was a hyperlink about naming conventions, but I didn't know if that was something specific to the UVM side.
That's specific to the UVM side. The naming conventions in the SF424 side will be based on what the sponsor wants to see. So different sponsors have different naming conventions. All right, so there's a few huge kind of process changes, and one of them I've been alluding to, or kind of talking about a decent amount, I guess, earlier, is so in the past, SPA as a central office has been really inserted into the business process a whole bunch. And over time, we've been trying to reduce that because honestly, it was a little bit, it was like we were forcing you to work through us for things that you knew how to do and you could do yourself, and forcing the process to slow way down. And really, it's best practice at most universities that are, research universities, that submit a lot of proposals, that the central office is much less involved in the day-to-day development of a sponsored project proposal than we had been in the past. And so we've been trying to move in this direction. So one of the big changes is, even now with InfoEd, for example, you're sending me that budget worksheet that you've started, I'm reviewing it, I'm uploading it to Info. There's like my sign off that this is a set budget, right? Before you even start the route, often before you enter in, if you're doing a sub-award budget off to the side, before you enter in that budget information, so that you know that this is all set budgetarily before we do anything else. Also, we were on the route as a first step so that we could make sure that you've included all the required information. Those are things that we are not doing now as a part of the standard business process of the system. Like, the system does not require us to do this. We are not doing that for every proposal. That's not going to be our job. However, we certainly know that this is a culture shift, right? And we are trying to move in this direction of trying to do the best practices that other research heavy universities do, but we know that this is kind of something that does take some time, and that this is a pretty big shift. So we want to make sure that you do loop us in if you have questions. There's obviously a balancing act. Like, I wouldn't expect to be called all the time for something, like a bunch of questions over and over again, or, hey, can you look at this? Can you look at this? Can you look at this? But if you have questions about interpreting sponsor guidelines, if you want to just If you say, hey, I think this is a final budget, can you just take a look at it before I do anything else on the proposal? Loop us in, and we would love to do that. What we would not love to do, what we don't want to do, is see something at the very end of this process when you've done a whole bunch of work on it and see a huge error that's now going to require you to make a bunch of changes that we could have helped out by being talked to early in the process. But the big thing is a lot of proposals don't require that. You know, there's tons of proposals where I am really not doing much. You know, I'm not adding a lot of extra value in the current system, but there's a lot of proposals where I add a ton of extra value. So instead, let's have us focus our time on when people need us to provide that value of, hey, does this meet the sponsor requirements? Can you help me understand what the sponsor is saying here with this language? You know, how can I best meet this? Are we doing everything we're supposed to be doing for this proposal? That kind of stuff. Versus the kind of like being this gatekeeper in all these various parts of the process. So to that end, obviously pick up the phone, send an email. There's also this pretty cool tool called a send email function that you can do, and you can send an email to anyone in UVM Click in the system, for example. But you also can send it to the specialist as a spot array. You can send it to a whole bunch of people, just the specialists, whatever. You can upload something here, you can write a comment, and this is an email that's generated by the system, and so a record of that is saved in the system. And so if you, for example, want to have a record of the fact that you reached out and got SPA's guidance on something, and for example, maybe Dan's reviewing something en route, and he says, oh, I wonder if this is actually right. He can go into the history and see, oh, they already looped in SPA, they already signed off on this, cool, that's great. Move forward. And so it's a good way of kind of saving all that stuff internal to the system. But again, phone calls, emails, like, you know, we don't want to be surprised at the beginning of the process. And so to that extent, also make sure you're giving enough time to route these things. You know, I forgot who asked earlier about kind of when we're going to be looking at things. If there's a bunch of time before something's due and you want our feedback, yeah, we might not get back to you immediately. But if you want us to sign off on something before you start the route and there's timeline pressures, like we want to be getting through this stuff and sorting through the requests to us really quickly. And we think with this system, it's going to allow us to much better able to kind of sort through all that and kind of get things moving and move stuff along, because now we're not the ones that are holding up movement in any piece of the proposal process, really. So the other huge change has to do with routing approvals. So InfoEd has a very flexible system of routing. It allows us to insert people, have multiple people review for different departments, et cetera, et cetera. Also, routing approvals go out to all of the chairs and deans for all the people named on the proposal. In UVM Click, that is not the case. None of that's the case. Basically, every single proposal that's submitted has one set routing process. It's, like we call it step 1, step 2, and it's only the proposing department chair and dean or their delegates. So we can only have two steps for any given proposal, and it's always going to be that. We can't insert people, and it's always just the proposing department. So some of the things that we have kind of to get around some of the issues with that, well, one thing I already showed was that cost share approval form. We currently use, one of the things that routing currently does is it currently approves cost share from other departments that are putting cost share on the proposal. Now those people aren't signing off on the route. So instead, if there is cost share from some of those other departments, their people on the proposal, you're going to get them to sign that cost share form outside the system and upload it into the system. The other thing is that every chair and dean will get notified when a named person in their department is on the route when the route is started. And then they can click through a link and review the proposal. They won't have a chance to sign off or approve the proposal, they can review it. And if they have a question, they can reach out to people, they can clarify stuff. Most important, we have a whole bunch of reporting tools for people so that chairs and deans and their delegates will be able to basically see all of the proposals in development that include their personnel. That would allow people to proactively figure out, like, see, oh, hey, I see that my investigator is on this other proposal. I need to make sure that, he's not being overcommitted. I need to make sure that we're not saying resources we don't have, et cetera, et cetera. And it allows people to, like, what happens a lot now is that people, like chairs and deans, get surprised when they get routed a proposal to them because they had never even heard about it, and it delays the whole process. This allows people to be proactive, and it hopefully will kind of speed up that process so that, you guys aren't waiting on someone else to do things. No one's going to shut the route down because they're waiting on the F&A allocation because someone in Rubenstein wants some F&A from CALS. Well, that's being handled totally outside of the system. Or not outside the system, that's being handled as a separate approval process from the route. And on every proposal, you can see who the reviewers will be. You would click this Reviewers tab, and it would show you step 1, step 2, the people that can sign off on this proposal. Also, anyone who has edit access on the proposal can start the route. So you don't have to track down a PI who's like on a tractor in the field somewhere. You can just do it for them. You can say submit for department review, and it goes en route. If you're not a PI, you would say, or someone else is starting it, they would say, I'm not the PI for the submission. They would say, okay. Then the PI is prompted to come in and do their the PI certification. Oh, I'm not the PI, so you won't see it. But let me show you it in this one. At any time, a PI can log in and click this PI certify button. So it doesn't have to wait till right before it's routing or after it's routing. They can just come in at any time and say PI certify. So we're not waiting for that. It's a much easier process than it currently is. When people review these proposals, this is what they see. InfoEd had it kind of packaged everything together nicely in that thing that you can kind of click through everything. UVM Click, you see it just like this. You see it, they will see what you've been seeing when you put the proposal together. So we would suggest things like using this printer version, kind of shows everything together nicely in one thing. Another thing to mention too is that you can technically start the route so long as you've just filled out that first set of forms that I showed you. You don't even have to have a budget or a system piece of the system. You obviously shouldn't do that. The system will technically allow you to do it. And my hope would be that someone like Dan or your chair would say, I think you're missing something, and would send it back to you. But just a reminder that, the system is, there's a lot of times when really InfoEd was this very closed off system that you had to do certain things in a certain order. UVM Click is much more open, which is really great. It means that it's much easier for people to just go through and do what they need to do in it. But it also means that we're giving people more responsibility like that. Another piece too is, so the departmental review, the chairs or deans, when they need a change made, they would just send it back to you, and it's really easy. They just click one button that says, they might say, oh, actually, I don't like the cost share. Can you make this change, right? They would send it back to you. You would make the change. If it comes to me as the SPA central office, the specialist review, I have the option to send it back to just the PI and have them, only them make a change, or the PI and those step 1 and step 2 reviewers. I would say the majority of the time, we'll probably be sending it back to the step 1, step 2 reviewers is my guess, but we'll kind of see how that works out. We are officially 3 minutes over time. I can still answer questions. These always run long, so any questions, or people can leave right now?
Not to interject, just because I do have to close the web broadcast, so I'd like to do the last question here. The question is, what happens with the previous proposals in InfoEd? Will they be uploaded to UVM Click?
If you have something that's been awarded, all awarded proposals are currently in UVM Click. We poured them over. If you have something that was proposed in InfoEd and it comes in as an award, when we get the award, we basically just create a really basic shell of what I just did, like not the budget, not anything like that, just to have the funding proposal in there. And there's a bunch of stuff to say about like supplements and continuations that might need routing that we don't have time for today, but you can come to proposals 2, and or there's a Q&A if any extension folk have questions about those, we can go over some of those on Thursday. All right, any other questions for people here?
Yeah, who finally submits the proposal? How does that work?
Well, it depends on what kind of proposal it is. If it's system to system, we submit it. If it's like NSF that requires that sponsor system, we have to be the one to submit an NSF, and that's still the case. If it's a sub-award, in this case, actually, when I get it on specialist review, there's actually a button that I can click that says like approved for submission, and basically, and I can actually even upload a signed LOI right there, and it basically pings you and says, this is all good to go, you can submit on your own, which is what mostly happens for sub-awards or for things to the state, for example. And so there's like a record in the system that I've told you, yeah, this is all set to submit, you're good, you can submit this.
When does the PI say it's all set?